Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today, I've gone back to the Answers in Genesis Canada channel as there is just too much there now that is too tempting for me to pass up. This time, it's a video on moral absolutes, and I am absolutely fascinated with how anyone can advocate for moral absolutes, because in my mind, they just don't make sense. There's only one moral absolute that I'm aware of, and that is that it is absolutely immoral for someone with a few bucks to spare to not go to the fundraiser link in the description and chip in for Project Share. So, now that everyone has done that, we can get on with the video!
Are there moral absolutes?
Aside from the aforementioned act of charity, no.
Hi, it's Calvin Smith here. Welcome to Creation Basics, where our goal is to make God's creation part of your everyday conversation with family and friends.
Ugh, AIG is turning into an MLM apparently. Is there someone in your circle of family and friends who has a slightly different belief system from you? Sign them up for heaven by using AIG talking points. If you only get 3 to sign up underneath you, and those 3 get 3 more, and so on, then eventually you will be personally responsible for having saved the entire human race, and so will get super awesome rewards in heaven.
Now, today's question, are there such a thing as moral absolutes?
Now might be a good time to go into my standard definitional talking points with regards to the different potential moral systems. You'll often find people confusing objective morality with absolute morality, and this includes me. Go back to some of my older videos on morality, and I definitely use these two terms interchangeably, but they are most definitely not the same. Objective means that you can determine an action to be either moral or immoral in a way that is not subject to opinion. So, for instance, if there is an LED that emits red light, we can objectively determine that the light is red by measuring its wavelength, let's say 700 nanometers. Now, subjectively, people perceive colors differently. Some people are colorblind, and so don't see as many colors as most of us, while others have a fourth type of cone cell in a mutation called tetrachromacy, and can perceive an estimated 99 million more colors than most of us do. And fun fact, the mothers of colorblind children tend to be tetrachromats, so those two are somehow linked. But all of these people can shine the LED at a spectrometer and come back with the same answer. The LED is emitting light at 700 nanometers, so they can objectively measure the wavelength of the emitted light regardless of their subjective opinion about which shade of red they think it looks like. So that's the difference between objective and subjective, but what about absolute? Well, let's bring another LED into the discussion, this time an RGB LED. Now, I know technically an RGB LED is actually 3 LEDs in one package, but for the sake of the analogy, let's just consider this as one LED. So the red LED emits 700 nanometer light, no matter what. It is absolutely and objectively red. But the RGB LED can emit different wavelengths of light depending on the inputs. These different wavelengths can all be objectively measured at whatever wavelengths they happen to be, but the wavelength being emitted will change depending on the circumstances, while the red LED is absolutely and objectively red. So, to bring this back around to morality, absolute morality would be the red LED. An action is moral or immoral, no matter what. Stealing is always wrong, even if it's a loaf of bread to feed your starving children. Lying is always wrong, even if it's to hide a Jew from a Nazi. Killing is always wrong, even if it's in self-defense. That would be absolute morality, and I think that most people can already see the problem with it. Most of us would agree that lying to hide a Jew from a Nazi is the morally right thing to do. Most of us would be okay with the idea of stealing a small amount of food in an emergency situation to keep your children alive, though often this would depend on who you're stealing from. If you steal from the local baker whose business was on the brink of bankruptcy, and if he goes bankrupt then his family will starve to death, then you might consider that to be an immoral action. But stealing from Walmart in the life or death situation? Walmart has a net income of almost $15 billion in their 2020 fiscal year. That's income after all their expenses. They are not in danger of going bankrupt anytime soon. So if stealing a $2 loaf of bread will literally save a child's life, then yes, it is moral to do so. It would be more moral if we just lived in a society that agreed to provide the basic necessities to the people who can't afford it, but I don't live in a utopian dream world, I live in the real world. So most of us would agree that absolute morality is not a thing. But what about objective? All of this seems very subjective so far. Well, objective morality can be a bit tricky. The thing with objective morality is that you first need to agree on what a desired outcome should be. But once the desired outcome is agreed upon, then we can compare the actual outcomes to the desired outcome and objectively measure whether or not an action brought us closer to or farther away from the desired outcome. But the desired outcome is necessarily subjective, and not everybody is going to agree on it, and there are so many potential confounding factors that this becomes a difficult operation in a lot of cases, such that we often don't have certainty as to the morality of an action.
You know, the Bible claims to be the Word of God, so it makes sense that Christians should look to it for guidance in all areas of their life.
Yes, if the Bible actually were the Word of God, and God actually did write it as a guidebook to show you how to live your life, then that would be true. But the Bible is a book that promotes a moral system that most of us, including Christians, find to be repugnant, so it turns out not to be true.
Starting from that belief, of course, the Bible then becomes like a compass. It's a way of navigating through life, giving them a way of thinking.
But that's not even how Answers in Genesis uses the Bible. They regularly have to appeal to assumptions about ancient cultures in order to justify the genocides in the Bible. They regularly have to misrepresent the rules about slavery in the Bible. The part where a rape victim is forced to marry her rapist is reframed as a kindness. God wanted to make sure that the woman was taken care of in a society that was not kind to women. I mean, couldn't the all-powerful God of the universe just influence their culture in a way that would have them treating women as equals, and so such heinous rules wouldn't be required? But those are the rules in the book, and the book has to be right, so we have to find a way to make these obviously immoral rules fit with our modern moral code, which then brings up another problem. God supposedly wrote morality on our hearts, so why is there even such a thing as a modern moral code? Shouldn't all humans, regardless of time or culture, have the same moral code since it supposedly is full of absolutes?
And God has revealed certain rules that apply to all people throughout time. Don't murder.
Unless the person you're murdering is an Amalekite or a Canaanite.
Do not steal.
Unless you're stealing land from the people who lived in the Holy Land before God promised it to you.
Don't commit adultery.
Unless it's with a concubine, of which you are allowed to have hundreds, along with your hundreds of wives.
Sex outside of marriage, etc.
No, actually, come to think of it, adultery in the Bible is specifically if you are married and have sex with someone who you are not married to. And while it never explicitly defines it this way, it seems to be centered on the woman, at least in the Old Testament. The rules surrounding adultery are always about a woman who cheats on her husband, never the other way around. A man is only guilty of adultery if the woman he slept with is married to someone else. There's even a procedure to follow to test and see if your wife was unfaithful, but there is no similar procedure for men, and also the procedure involves aborting a fetus that the woman had with another man, so you can't say the Bible's against abortion. Back to the point. If you think having multiple wives is immoral, or that a man having sex with a woman he is not married to is immoral, then your morality disagrees with the morality of the Bible. Yeah, there are apologetics that attempt to bring the Old Testament rules about marriage and adultery into the fold of morality, but you have to read things into the text that aren't actually there in order to accomplish this.
So these are referred to as moral absolutes.
But how are they moral absolutes if there are situations in which they don't apply? I mean, I guess you could technically get out of the murder one with an argument appealing to the definition. Murder is only the unlawful killing of another person, so when God commands you to kill a baby, that's not murder. But if your moral code can have killing the babies of your enemies as a morally good thing to do, then I don't really care about the technical definition of murder. To me, that is morally repugnant.
Now, a consistent atheist, of course, is forced to believe that there are no absolutes. Why?
I don't necessarily disagree, but I'm also pretty sure that most Christians don't really believe in moral absolutes either, judging by how they dance around the various immoral laws laid out in the Bible.
Well, because they've got to believe in some type of self-creation or evolution, which means everything was generated randomly. There's no intelligence behind it.
Nope, that is not what it means. And whether it was generated randomly or with purpose, with or without an intelligence behind it, has no impact on morality. I don't think moral absolutes exist because they don't appear to exist, not because of evolution. Morality itself does not exist without beings who are able to conceptualize morality. So as far as the Earth is concerned, morality didn't come on the scene for at least a few billion years, and most moral development has happened in the last 500,000 years. How can something be absolute if it is so obviously subject to change over time?
So logically, if every person's mind is a result of a random chance process over time, there isn't even a reason to trust logic or reason or anyone's opinion anyway.
How does that even follow? Logic is descriptive. We don't trust it because there's some intelligence that makes it work. It just is what it is. We don't know that it could even be any different than it is. Maybe we have it wrong. Maybe one day we'll find something that violates the law of non-contradiction or one of the other ones. That will require a revamping of our understanding of logic. But until such a day comes, the laws of logic that we have are the best tools that we have for understanding, logic. And all of this has nothing to do with the process that developed our brains over time. Why should the processes that developed human consciousness impact the laws of logic? If I ask a random number generator for a number and it spits out a 5, and then I ask a kid for a number and that kid also says 5, is there a qualitative difference between the randomly selected 5 and the deliberately selected 5? If you multiply the two of them together, do you not get 25, regardless of the fact that one of them was randomly generated while the other was deliberately contrived?
If there's no God, there are no standards. Then each person has the right to decide for themselves about right and wrong. And this means no absolutes.
Yeah, each person does decide for themselves what they think is right and wrong. And when you put a bunch of these people together into, say, a society, you'll find that there is often a correlation on certain issues. And so we take the issues that we mostly agree on and codify them into laws with agreed upon punishments. This is why different societies have had different rules over time. The collective morality of the people that made up these societies are all different. Sometimes only slightly, but sometimes significantly so. This is a really weird outcome if there really are moral absolutes out there.
So, are there absolutes or aren't there?
There don't appear to be.
This is a big question because if there are, then there must be a lawgiver, a creator of them.
Why? Human morality is necessarily framed in terms of human preferences. We don't need an external source to make our preferences go one way or another, even if there is some absolute that we all do prefer.
If there isn't a creator, then we aren't bound to absolutes. For example, is raping and killing a child wrong?
Yes, it is wrong. I would say that it is objectively wrong based on a goal of increasing well-being and decreasing harm. I could even agree that I am unable to conceive of a situation in which that would not be morally wrong. That being said, there are places in the Bible where killing children is not just permitted, but commanded by God. And there's at least one place where the raping of young girls is very heavily implied. But why do you need to go to big items that most of us, thankfully, will never encounter in our lives? Most people go through life without ever murdering someone or being murdered. Most people won't rape anyone in their lifetime, and most people won't be raped in their lifetime. Although if we divide it into categories, most here only applies to 4 out of 5 women, since a staggering 21.3% experience completed or attempted rape at some point in their lives, and a whopping 43.6% experience some form of contact sexual violence in their lives. If morality were absolute, how could these numbers be so high? More to the point, there is a lot of sexual abuse that gets swept under the rug at religious institutions, with the victims being told that reporting the abuse would mean that they love themselves more than they love God, and they should protect the reputation of the institution. And these are the organizations that claim to be speaking for the source of absolute morality. But does absolute morality apply to the small decisions in life? Is it absolutely wrong to steal a pen from work? What if they don't have an official policy on pen thievery and pretty much expect you to steal their pens? And here's a weird one. What about wearing underwear? Where I work, it is explicitly written into the dress code that undergarments must be worn at all times. Now, I'm sure this was just a way of saying that women have to wear bras without appearing sexist, but it's right there. I have to wear underwear at work. So, would it be immoral for me to go commando? Some people would say yes, it's a violation of the workplace dress code, and following the rules is the moral thing to do. Others would say no, fuck them, they have no right to peek down my pants to see whether or not I'm complying with this rule, and even just having this as a rule is immoral. And you guys don't use small examples like this because it makes the flaw in your logic rather obvious. Different people have different moral opinions, meaning that morality is not absolute. And actually, in this case, my objective moral system has an answer. This place is a restaurant. There is a lot of walking involved in working in a restaurant. The dining room is usually hot. The kitchen is always hot. It gets sweaty. Lots of sweat, plus lots of walking, plus no underwear equals lots of chafing. It wouldn't do anyone any good for me to not wear underwear, and it would do me some harm. Therefore, it is immoral for me to not wear underwear at work, regardless of the dress code. Now, After doing a poll on this question, I found, unsurprisingly, that most people do not consider the absence of my underwear to be a moral problem, but about 72 of the 442 voters do consider it to be immoral. Now, as most of the people who follow me on Twitter are atheists, I would guess that the yes number would be higher if this were a poll in the general population. A lot of Christian sects teach that following the rules is a moral issue, even if it's something goofy and nonsensical like this, where the management have no legal way of finding out whether or not I'm breaking this rule. But if we just assume a similar proportion of the general population, that means that in the US and Canada, there would be a combined total of about 59.6 million people who think that it is a moral problem to go commando when my workplace builds underwear into the dress code. For perspective, that's just a little bit under the number of people who voted for John McCain in the 2008 US election. In other words, yes, there might be some big-ticket items that the vast majority of people will agree on, but when it comes to the smaller issues, there is often a significant amount of disagreement.
Most would say yes, but that would mean there are absolutes. It's absolutely true that for a human to rape and kill a child is always wrong.
Again, I would not say absolute, I would say it is objectively wrong. Given the goal of decreasing harm and increasing well-being, there is not a scenario, aside from wildly implausible hypotheticals, in which such an action could have a net increase of well-being. So it does have the appearance of being an absolute, and maybe that is one that I would potentially concede to being absolute, but none of this requires an external source of morality in order to arrive at these conclusions. We can do it all by ourselves.
A consistent atheist would be forced to say something like, well, I personally believe it's wrong. But logically, they'd have to admit that the murderer has a right to believe whatever they want to.
I mean, yeah, the murderer is free to believe that the murder isn't wrong, but as I explained earlier, we can objectively determine that the murderer is wrong in their assessment.
Which means it's right for the murderer.
Nope, not what it means at all. It is possible to believe incorrect things. The murderer believing themselves to be in the right in this situation does not make it so.
So they can't actually be wrong.
Yep, they can.
You see, some atheists say that you can believe whatever you want as long as you don't hurt someone else.
And do you have a problem with that? I mean, I guess you probably do, because you want everyone to believe like you. And you're free to believe that as long as you don't hurt anyone else. But, oh wait, you're out here spewing bad ideas into the void of the internet, ideas that can and do cause demonstrable harm. So maybe keep these beliefs to yourself before you create more scientifically illiterate people.
But is that true? Is it absolutely true?
Okay, now that's just sad. You seem to be trying to do that thing that presuppositional apologists love to do, where they ask if people believe in absolute truth, and then ask if it is absolutely true that there's no absolute truth. But we're talking about morality here, not truth. So you're not just equivocating, you are failing at using shitty equivocation.
If it's true, then there are absolutes. It's absolutely true that no one should ever hurt someone else.
No, absolutely not. To reiterate, he was talking about people having the right to believe whatever they want to, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. Believing that as a principle does not automatically mean that it is absolutely wrong to ever hurt anyone. I would argue that self-defense is a situation in which you can morally justify hurting someone. Protection too. If you come across someone getting mugged and you are able to help but need to hurt the mugger in order to do it, then hurting the mugger is morally justified. But you, with your absolute morals, cannot justify causing harm in these situations if your position is that hurting others is absolutely immoral, because in order to be absolute, it has to be true regardless of the situation.
Which means this statement actually argues against a belief in no absolutes.
Incorrect.
Now, when someone says something that, if true, means it's false, it's called a self-refuting argument. It can't possibly be true.
Yeah, but in this case, it's not a self-refuting statement because you had to use equivocation and strawmanning in order to get there. If you need to use multiple logical fallacies to get to a position of having refuted the argument against your position, then the argument against your position has not been refuted.
And this type of argument literally self-destructs. We've all heard these types of statements. I mean, think of a couple of them here. How about, well, you can't know anything for sure.
Nope, not true. Any knowledge that is based entirely on definitions can be known for sure. I know for sure that no married bachelors exist, as long as we first agree that bachelor here is being defined as an unmarried man, seeing as how an alternative definition is someone who holds a bachelor's degree, so they obviously can get married. Also, everyone can be certain of their own existence. Maybe not their experiences, but their existence is a sure thing. You can't be certain of other people's existence, not 100%, but your own is in the bag. And really, this whole thing is you trying to use intellectual honesty against your opponent. You are willing to ignore the fact that our brains are known to create vivid experiences that never happened under the right circumstances, in order to claim that you know for certain that God exists. An intellectually honest person will admit that because we know our brains can be tricked into experiencing reality in a way that does not actually comport with reality, it is impossible to know for certain that we aren't just a brain in the vat. But you'll find almost nobody actually believes in hard solipsism, just that intellectually honest people will admit that it is a possibility, though there is no evidence supporting it as a conclusion.
Well, how do you know that for sure?
Because we can be certain of what is happening in our own minds. That's really about the only thing that we can have 100% certainty in. I know I exist because I know that I am having experiences. I know that a married bachelor does not exist because I know the definition that I understand for the word bachelor.
Talking about God is meaningless. Then your statement itself is meaningless.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that talking about God is meaningless. I've heard it said that it is pointless, sure, but even then it's usually about trying to convince people to stop believing in God being a pointless endeavor, not that just any general conversation that has the word God in it is a pointless conversation. And also, I would point out that that's actually a comment I get semi-regularly on my channel. Why bother? You're not going to change anyone's minds. This whole thing is pointless. Well, YouTube atheists played a not insignificant role in my deconversion, and I have had several messages from people who have told me that I played at least a partial role in their deconversion, so no, it is not pointless. I do what I do for past me.
Well, there's no such thing as truth.
Well, I am sure that there are people out there who would agree that there is no such thing as truth. I am not one of those people. I would define truth as a statement that comports with reality, and we can measure reality by making predictions about how it will behave.
Is that a true statement?
In my opinion, no.
There are no absolutes. Are you absolutely sure that there are no absolutes?
There's that equivocation again. You're relying on two different definitions of absolute in order to make that point. The philosophical noun absolute is a value or principle which is regarded as universally valid, or which may be viewed without relation to other things. But the adjective absolutely in the absolutely sure part of that statement is using the not qualified or diminished in any way or total definition of absolute. You can have an undiminished certainty that no values or principles exist which could be regarded as universally valid without it being self-contradictory. Would you be correct? I think so, but it is not a self-defeating statement.
Well, no one can know, for sure any truth about religion. Then how do you know that truth about religion?
Again, that isn't something that I have ever heard anyone say. Now, I have heard people say that nobody can know for sure whether or not God exists, which by extension implies that nobody can know for sure whether or not a religion in general is true, but you have to bastardize that in order to turn it into a self-defeating statement.
You see the point here? Science is the only sure method of finding truth.
No, it is not. No scientist worth their salt will tell you that science is a sure thing. It's just the best that we have so far, and it's certainly better than your word games.
Well, what specific scientific experiment taught you that truth?
Why does it need to be a single specific scientific experiment? Could it not just be the demonstrable and measurable results that the scientific method has had over the years? You're trying to constrain it to something that would be impossible in order to claim that it is impossible when in reality no such constraint exists.
You can even people are saying things like, well, you can only know truth through experience, but what experience would have taught you that?
Okay, I'm gonna need you to start providing citations for these statements. I have literally never heard anyone say that, ever. I mean, again, I suppose you could bastardize the whole truth is that which comports with reality as adjudicated by predictive power into that, seeing as how the testing of a prediction would qualify as an experience, but are you seriously trying to suggest that we can know the truth through a method other than experience? How can you learn something without an experience? I got the knowledge from God. Okay, so you experienced God giving you that knowledge. I feel like you're trying to equivocate again, like you want us to think that you meant something like these people don't believe that they can know that a stove is hot unless they touch it themselves, when in reality you can have the experience of someone else warning you that the stove is hot. That is still an experience, even if you never directly experienced the hot stove for yourself. Sure, you could choose not to believe them and then go mash your hand on the stove, but that doesn't make your conversation with them any less of an experience.
Some people like to avoid the concept of absolutes because they believe it leads to intolerance and makes people judgmental.
Don't do it. I see it coming, but please, no. Don't say that we're intolerant of your intolerance. That is such a stupid line. Be better.
For example, many people, times people will be offended when a Christian states their views on certain subjects based on what the Bible teaches. Like, someone might take offense if a Christian disagrees with same-sex marriage, for example.
Yeah, you see, this isn't a problem with you just believing that same-sex marriage is wrong. This is a problem with you lobbying the government to make same-sex marriage illegal. When a gay or lesbian couple get married, it does not do you any harm, but you actively denigrate them. Using my objective measuring stick of harm versus benefit, allowing LGBTQ people to get married does not actually harm anyone and benefits the LGBTQ people, and in more ways than just their personal emotional fulfillment, which should be enough on its own. But there's also things like estate laws, taxes, and hospital visitation privileges, which all favor married couples over unmarried ones. Were you to be successful in outlawing their marriages, that would do a lot of harm and no good. So it is objectively wrong to ban same-sex marriage because it creates harm where there need be none.
God doesn't agree with it, the Christian might say.
Well, then God's an asshole for making people LGBTQ and then insisting that they not be what he made them.
Well, a typical response might be something like, well, that's the problem with Christians. They're always judging other people's morals and values.
No, you see, the problem is not your personal judgmental feelings on the matter. That just makes you an asshole. The problem is your actions that result from these personal judgmental feelings.
Well, when they did that, they also judged the Christians' morals and values.
Yeah, well, the atheists are not the ones with the book that literally says, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." And that might not have been the exact phrasing, but that's exactly the argument. They're just intolerant of our intolerance.
Some people might want to say, well, it's okay to judge as long as you don't try to force your morality and opinions on other people.
That depends on what opinions we're talking about. If your opinions are objectively shit, then yeah, don't force those opinions on others, especially not when allowing those others to just exist as they are doesn't actually do anything to hurt you.
Well, it's easy to point out that if that's their morality and opinion, why are they trying to force it on other people?
We're not. You're allowed to have your shitty moral opinions. We just don't want you to be able to legislate your shitty moral opinions. There is a significant difference there. A murderer is allowed to have the opinion that murdering is not immoral, but as soon as they follow through and commit murder, they have now performed an action that has an effect on another person's life, and so should be held accountable. Same principle here. You can be as much of a bigot as you want, but if your actions start affecting other people, then just remember that actions have consequences.
So there's virtually no way to be a consistent moral relativist.
Who said anything about relative morality? I've been making a case for objective morality this whole time. I'm sure a case could be made for moral relativism, but the position that has the hardest time being consistent is the one that advocates for moral absolutes, because you can't find a single instance of a moral absolute that isn't violated either by your God or by your God's command in the Bible. How can a moral be absolute if it is moral to violate it on occasion? And really, absolute morality would be easier to argue as an atheist. I could say genocide is absolutely wrong in all circumstances at all times. You cannot, because you have a book in which the guy who is supposed to be the source of your morality both commands and commits genocide on multiple occasions. We don't have a book that violates every potential principle that could be posited as a moral absolute. You do.
I've seen people argue that there's no clear-cut right and wrong passionately 1 minute, and then talk about how unfair it was that the person at work got a raise and they didn't the next minute. Well, how do they suddenly know that that's wrong?
But now, is that a clear-cut right and wrong situation? Are you saying it is obviously wrong that they did not get a raise? Now, I don't know their situation. Did they deserve a raise? Did the person who actually get the raise not deserve it? Was there favoritism going on, or nepotism? Were there any conflicts of interest? Was there something performance-based that can be objectively measured? It is possible for me to not believe in absolute right and wrong, and still think it unfair for someone else to have gotten a raise before me, even if I didn't deserve it.
You see, someone saying that there's no God and no rules shouldn't say that anyone else's opinions are wrong, including Christians whose opinions they don't agree with.
I can actually agree with that statement. Someone who says there are no rules cannot reasonably expect people to follow the rules. Now find me such a person and we can both agree that they are wrong together. Oh look, what's that over there? I found one! Oh wait, on closer inspection it just seems to be clothes stuffed with straw.
So, are there moral absolutes? Yes.
You just failed to demonstrate any. At least any that would be supported by your book claimed to have been written by the guy that you are claiming as the source of these absolutes. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Jim Copeland, who says, I don't know why creationists are so afraid of defining the term kind, but I'm pretty sure that they are typically referring to the taxonomic classification of family. Yes, Jim, they generally do use family as a kind of divider, but they usually don't come out and say it, for two reasons. First, that would make humans the same kind as the rest of the great apes, and they can't have that. May as well just admit to macroevolution at that point. And second, it allows them to jump around as needed to allow two very superficially similar species that are not in the same family to still be the same kind, while denying two very superficially different species that are in the same family the same kind label. Thanks for watching. Special thanks as always to my patrons, Lynn Dobbs, Mark McManus, What Jesus, and all the rest, who are the absolutes to the truth that is my channel. If you'd like to not be absolutely certain of your existence, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino. If you feel so inclined, you can support the channel through direct donation or my Amazon wishlist, which are linked in the description, as well as my social media accounts, my P.O. Box address, and a link to my podcast, which is just basically this, but smushed into one video instead of two, and it's not a video, it's audio because, podcast. See you next time!